we've seen an additional round of polling now post Election Day 2025. If you recall, the last time I delved into a poll with you guys, it was the NBC News poll, and it was a poll that came out before the Election Day 2025. And it's worth noting how prescient that poll was. It had Democrats with an 8-point generic ballot advantage on the generic congressional ballot. No other poll had shown anything like that. Now, pretty much every poll that's come out has shown Democrats with anywhere from a 5 to a Marist poll that shows a 14-point lead. I think that's a super outlier. But there are other polls out there that show it consistently 5, 6, 7. It shows you that 8-point number was not an outlier. There were some people who were trying to argue that was an outlier. That was not an outlier. And I think we saw there was another part of that poll that I failed to make a big deal out of that, frankly, I meant to. I'd written it down in my notes, but I didn't bring it up, and I should have. And that was sort of one of the ways the Hart McInturf, one of the regular questions that the NBC News poll has had on that poll going back I want to say we started doing this in the 08 cycle, maybe 06 cycle, is on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in this election, in the next election, interest in the election. And what was remarkable in this poll here in 2025 is the number was already in the mid 50s. And this was asking about the 2026 midterms. A year out, and it was in the mid 50s. That number was in the 40s 4 years before. And it's regular. This was sort of being in the mid 50s felt like a summer of an election year number, not a fall of the year before. Well, what did that foreshadow? The massive turnout advantage that Democrats ended up showcasing on Election Day 2025. We saw New Jersey. I continue to go back to the New Jersey example. Virginia, you can write off as a federal worker issue. New Jersey, where there was a not so popular 2-term Democratic governor being replaced, it was term limited, and the Republican nominee got more votes this time than he got 4 years ago, and he ended up losing by 13 percentage points. That is a flashing red light for the Republicans. And I will say this: so we've gotten these two new generics out there, Marist, and I know the Marist folks well. They are very they're very careful about what they're very transparent about their methodology, and so their numbers can be a bit more fluid. And academic pollsters in general get a little skittish about weighting based on different things. They very much want to have a more hands-off approach into some of the decision-making that they make on weights. So the Marist will fluctuate more. And that's why it's always important. Don't compare two different polls to each other. Compare a pollster's trend line to themselves. And so the trend line fits the same trend line we're seeing. What Marist showed a month ago is now moved in the Democratic direction. Well, guess what? Every poll has moved in the Democratic direction. You've seen a consistent rise in Trump's disapproval rating, a consistent rise in the spread between Democrats and Republicans on the generic ballot. They're clearly something has turned here. It looks like it's mostly economy-based more than anything else, right? You may think it's about Epstein, or you may think it's about some of these other things. Ultimately, I think the great lesson that everybody should go back and take away from 2024 is that ultimately it's about prices, and it's about cost of living. And the cost of living has been skyrocketing everywhere, right? And the latest issue is electric bills. And the fact is you can't, the White House is nervous. That's why they wiped away the food tariffs. That's nice that maybe they can sort of slow down the rise in grocery prices. But the rise in electric bills around the country is going to eat into whatever tariff savings he creates there. And of course, he spent his speech browbeating the Fed. And if the Fed lowers interest rates too quickly, and I think there's a real divide on this, because they're going to imagine the Fed lowers interest rates and Trump sends out $2,000 checks, we're going to be in 2021 all over again. And remember what happened in 2021? That's when we had another surge of inflation that essentially ruined Biden's presidency, right? He could not get out from under that initial inflation surge where the market was flooded with easy money, and lower interest rates plus a tariff rebate check would all would flow extra easy money in there. And I promise you, prices aren't going to go down. Just the opposite. Prices are going to go up. So he is not, this economy is not in a good situation. There's not many levers he can pull here. And yet, one thing you know about Donald Trump is he's always going to try to pull a lever. And in some ways, the more levers he tries to pull, the more he makes things worse. If you need an example of that, just look at what he did with redistricting. He has now put his party in a worse place, right? By bullying all these legislatures to do this, he's put his party now in a worse place. If this map doesn't get upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. But I want to go back through these because there was another poll that was out that I think gives you a sense of how to read some of these generic ballot numbers. The Marquette Law School poll. I'm a big fan of the Marquette poll. It's he's a steady pollster there. Charles Murray, I believe is his name. Hang on one second. Let me get that right. Charles Franklin. Charles Murray is another academic that I had in my head is Charles Franklin. Anyway, it's a very good poll, very consistent. One of the things, by the way, he does quarterly is probably the most thorough examination on the public opinion side of the public's opinions of the Supreme Court, for what it's worth. So it is a poll that I care about a lot. Well, they came out and their generic ballot among just registered voters was 49-44, the Democrats. Then he said among those certain to vote, the Democratic lead expands to 9 points. More importantly, in that poll, Trump's approval rating among independent voters is below 30%. So look, there's also already a disadvantage for Republicans when it comes to these off-year elections, as Democrats have the more regular voters. Democrats have the voters that are definitely going to show up, which is why you see those more certain to vote, the Democratic lead expands. So if you're the Republicans and you're trying to hold Congress, among registered voters, you're hoping that the number is, you don't want a separation on the generic ballot of more than 1, 2, or 3 points at this point, because among likely voters, it's going to basically, whatever the spread is among registers, it's basically going to double. And so, I think the way these congressional districts are gerrymandered, Democrats probably have to be ahead somewhere between 6 and 7 points on the national generic ballot in order to win control of the House. Maybe if the Texas map doesn't get upheld, and let's say Virginia still gets aggressive and decides to redistrict and helps out the Democratic numbers there, maybe that number goes down to 4 or 5. But the point is, we're already in territory where the House is gone, right? Anything north of 6 points, the Republicans have lost the House. And as you keep creeping up, then suddenly you start to see that the Senate is in play. Do you hate hangovers? Well, say goodbye to hangovers. Out of Office gives you the social buzz without the next day regret. Their best-selling Out of Office gummies were designed to provide a mild, relaxing buzz, boost your mood, and enhance creativity and relaxation. With 5 different strengths, you can tailor the dose to fit your vibe. From a gentle 1.5 milligram micro dose to their newest 15 milligram gummy for a more elevated experience. Their THC beverages and gummies are a modern, mindful alternative to a glass of wine or a cocktail. And I'll tell you this, I've given up booze. I don't like the hangovers. I prefer the gummy experience. Soul is a wellness brand that believes feeling good should be fun and easy. Soul specializes in delicious hemp-derived THC and CBD products, all designed to boost your mood and simply help you unwind. And if you struggle to switch off at night, Soul has a variety of products specifically designed to help you get a better night's rest, including their top-selling Sleepy Gummies. It's a fan favorite for deep, restorative sleep. So bring on the good vibes and treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul is offering my audience 30% off your entire order. So go to getsoul.com, use the promo code ToddCast. Don't forget that code. That's getsoul.com, promo code ToddCast for 30% off. One of the talks I did a few days ago was on with another analyst who was very involved in one of the Virginia races, the AG race, and I want to protect. We were in an off the record setting, so I just want to share the analysis. But the basic analysis of why did Jay Jones win? How did he win? Well, he won because the number of split ticket voters in Virginia was about 6 or 7%. Yes, I know what I just did, 6, 7. Have at it, everybody. But it was somewhere in the 6 to 7% range here, and it is interesting because she won by 15 points, um, and Jones was able to win by 5 or 6. So you start to see what that range is. And if you applied this, so Susan Collins in 2020 overperformed by about 6 to 7 points, indicating a split ticket vote in Maine of about 6 or 7 percentage points of the electorate. So, we've all been trying to calculate what is the maximum number of voters who might actually be vacillating between the two parties, right? Most of the differences these days are which party turns out more of their voters. That's the difference between why Democrats may do better in Ohio in a midterm year and Republicans do better in Ohio in a presidential year. But the question is, who's the persuadable number, right? Who are the voters? We used to have 15, 20, 25% of voters that would be split ticket voters. We're nowhere near that. But it's interesting to me that what you saw in Maine was about 6 or 7% on the split ticket side. What we saw in Virginia 5 years later, same sort of 6 or 7. So just keep that in mind, right? And so what does that mean? So let's say you have this generic ballot sitting where Democrats are up north of 6 points, which I would argue is what their advantage was. It looks like in the off-year elections, essentially anything between any state legislative district that Donald Trump carried by 5 points or less, Democrats won in Virginia. Now they only won, I think, one seat where Trump carried a legislative district by somewhere between 5 and 10 points. So let's assume that sort of 5 point buffer, you apply that. So what that would mean is that it makes Ohio Senate a coin flip. And then you already have a bit of breeze at Sherrod Brown's back because Democratic turnout advantages. That becomes a coin flip race. It is a winnable race. I'm not saying he's going to win it. It is a winnable race. Then if you apply there's 6 to 7% of potential split ticket voters. All right. Then suddenly you say, okay, what would that do numbers wise in a Texas, numbers wise in an Iowa, numbers wise in a Kansas, although there's no serious Kansas Senate candidate yet, or numbers wise in a Mississippi. And that's where you start to see where I don't think Democrats in a presidential year could win a Mississippi Senate race, could win an Iowa Senate race, could win a Kansas Senate race, and probably not a Texas Senate race, though I think Texas is a bit more fluid than we fully appreciate. In a midterm year, they can, right? You apply essentially a generic 5 point advantage, and then on top of that, right, you have another 6 to 7% of voters who are willing to split their ticket. If you accept the premise that this is essentially what we've seen in any competitive race, at least in our new Trump polarized era, that does put Kansas, Alaska, Mississippi, all of that on the radar, which is why I think right now I've never been more bullish on Democrats' chances to do well in the midterms than I am this week. I've been a bit skeptical all year because because of a few things. One is just the simple unpopularity of the Democratic brand. But that was meaningless. I mean, it turned out to be meaningless, right? The other big sort of what do you call it? Rule these days of the Trump era is we just vote against, right? We don't like whoever's in power. And so we are voting out parties in power when we get a chance. We are voting out incumbents, presidents when we get a chance, right? We've done it. I mean, to think about it, we've essentially fired 2 incumbent administrations back to back. And if you count Trump's victory over Clinton, that's 3 in a row on that front. The House flipped in 18, the House flipped again in 22, right? So the Senate flipped in 20, the Senate flipped again in 22. Excuse me, the Senate flipped again, not in 22, in 20, then it flipped again in 24. You notice here how it, on that front. So I do think that Um, if Democrats can't use this moment to find good candidates to run in Kansas, good candidates to run in Alaska, big money to donate to places like Mississippi, Iowa Senate, Kansas Senate, Alaska Senate. They can't do it at this moment, then I don't know when they're going to do it. This is their opportunity. The polling's never looked better, and I'm a big believer in the Haley barbarism. I love my old Haley barbarisms, and one of my favorite is good gets better and bad gets worse. And I think we're in a situation where bad is going to get worse for Trump, right? Because he's going to keep trying to fix it, and the stuff he does to fix it will only divide his party. Like he's already divided his party on whether to even do these rebate checks. He thinks he can do this without Congress. Good luck, right? He's going to get a haircut when the tariff ruling comes down. So all of these things, I think that he's likely, his instinct to meddle and to think he can somehow change the weather is likely to take a bad situation and make it worse for him on this front. And even though you have a Democratic Party that doesn't like its leadership, there's a total vacuum there. There is such enthusiasm at pushing back against Trump. There's such a belief that, hey, this stuff is working, right? The courts ruled against them in Texas. Voters got behind doing something that I didn't think was as, I don't think we fully appreciate how impressive the feat was with Gavin Newsom in California. You start to see where good gets better on that front. But we're still in fairness, we're still in the wake of what was, this has just been a really bad November for Trump, the Republican brand, Republicans in general. Is every month going to be like this between now and next November? That's unlikely, right? But it is, if this economy continues to be this uneven, and especially if we continue with this AI bubble talk, and there's a lot of conversations out there that this is looking a lot more like 1998 and 1999, which was basically the first time the internet bubble completely popped. As I joke, will somebody please tell me which one of these AI companies is pets.com? And there is certainly that hanging over the head. And so if even that doesn't go well, then that turns people, even those that have a little bit of money, will suddenly be feeling sour about how Trump is handling this economy. This episode of the ToddCast is brought to you by Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first bake from frozen subscription box for artisanal breads, seasonal pastries, and fresh pastas. Plus, all items conveniently bake in 25 minutes or less. Unlike many store-bought options, Wild Grain uses simple ingredients you can pronounce and a slow fermentation process that can be easier on your belly and richer in nutrients and antioxidants. Wild Grain's boxes are fully customizable. They're constantly adding seasonal and limited time products for you to enjoy. In addition to their classic box, they now feature a gluten-free box and a plant-based box. I checked out the gluten-free box, and let me tell you, they have a gluten-free sourdough bread. We got 2 loaves of it, and we've done 1 loaf already. It's a cranberry and almond sourdough bread. It's like the best raisin bread you've ever had, except it's not raisins. It's hit or miss if you mess around in the gluten-free bread world. This is a hit. This is well done. It's not heavy. It doesn't feel like a rock. Anyway, I was impressed. So look, for a limited time, Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off your first box, plus free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/ToddCast to start your subscription. $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/ToddCast. That's wildgrain.com/ToddCast, or simply use the promo code ToddCast at checkout. Always use the code, get the discount. I'm telling you, it's excellent, excellent bread. I want to just end on California governor. We just got a new candidate jumping in the race, Tom Steyer. You may remember him as a climate change activist who ran for president, kind of self-funder. Steyer is a guy who doesn't look like he ever laughs. He is always serious, borderline a little bit angry. And he's and I think he takes his positions very seriously. He takes politics very seriously. He's willing to spend his money as a to do these things. But I don't think you can be dour all the time. You have to have some sunny in you somewhere, right? I think the key we've all, you heard Chris Liz and I discussed this quite a bit during the election night live stream that we did. One of Mamdani's superpowers is his optimism and the constant smile on his face. So, you got to project some optimism with voters. And, Steyer has been in this dire sort of dark place about climate change, right? The end is coming sooner than we think. Dark about democracy. He inserted himself a bit into the referendum campaign to do the redistricting in California. It was an insertion that not many great Gavin Newsom folks appreciated. But look, you know why he got in? Because this has been, I have to say, so far, the development of the California governor's race is one of the big head scratchers to me. This is in 1991, when all of these big time Democrats decided that George H.W. Bush wasn't beatable in the 1992 general election. People like Dick Gephardt, Al Gore, Bill Bradley, Jay Rockefeller, Sam Nunn, all these supposed rising stars of the early 90s all decided not to run. And the people that did run were nicknamed the Seven Dwarfs. And it was Bill Clinton, it was Paul Tsongas, you had Doug Wilder in that race, you had Bob Kerrey in that race. I know I'm leaving, Tom Harkin was in that race. But collectively, that crew was, because there was no star power at the time. Bill Clinton wasn't a star then. Bill Clinton ended up sticking out as like the best political athlete on stage with a whole bunch of sort of tier two senators and governors who showed themselves up, and it, I think, helped catapult him to quick stardom at the time. I remember a debate, I believe it was on PBS, the first time they all appeared together, and Bill Clinton was the sort of the clear like star of this field. But in general, it was treated like the Seven Dwarfs. That's kind of how I feel about the current makeup of this California governor's race. Here's an open seat for California governor that where you get to be the governor of the fourth largest economy in the world. It is as important of a position. I think it's, New York City mayor's probably slightly more prominent on the international stage because of New York City's prominence. But California governor's probably, New York City may be a harder PR job. California governor is just a harder job, especially these days. It's weird. It's, you think a single party state makes it easy. It's all these one party states are still two party states, meaning there's sort of two wings of the one party that fight each other. I mean, Texas is kind of a three party state, right? You have the Democrats as one party, and then you have two wings of the Republican Party that are at war with each other. You have essentially the Ken Paxton, Dan Patrick wing, that Greg Abbott is suddenly now on one side. And then you have sort of the old Bush, Rick Perry, John Cornyn wing of the party, a bit more pro-business. And what's interesting, that wing worked with the Democrats to elect the last speaker of the Texas legislature. But the point is, these one-party states, politics, the expression politics abhors a vacuum. Even in the one-party states, there's always an opposition. Sometimes the opposition comes from an outside force. In Oklahoma, it's not the Democrats or a slice of the Republicans. It's the tribes who are very wealthy, and they will fund primary foes. They will fund candidates to keep sort of as the quote check, if you will, on the Republican leadership in that state. And in California, you pretty much, you have a very liberal progressive wing of the party. And then you have a very sort of pro-business Democratic wing of the party. And collectively, it's given Democrats this illusion of a supermajority, but it actually makes it quite difficult to govern. But it has been interesting to me how few big-time rising stars have wanted to jump into this race. Because it isn't, this doesn't come open very often. And, you've had Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom, essentially governor of California for the last 16 years. And they've kind of been hovering over Democratic politics in California for the entire 21st century. This is the first time the page is going to turn. Now, I understood that with the referendum and the redistricting, that kind of whatever jockeying was taking place on when it came to the governor's race sort of got put on pause while all efforts went in there. But we're still, I mean, let's just be honest. This thing is lacking star power. You have Javier Becerra, the former congressman, former state attorney general, who's one of his closest advisors just got indicted. And it's an investigation. You can't just chalk this up to a Trump investigation. It's an investigation that started during the Biden Justice Department and continued during the Trump Justice Department. Basically, a dummy job, right? You know, sort of using Becerra's name and a position to, you know, there's no evidence that Becerra was a part of this, but I think it tarnishes him, whether he thinks that's fair or not. I think it does. You've had somebody I've interviewed on this podcast who I find to be one of the more interesting characters in this race, Steve Klubeck, who is, of course, made his money doing timeshares. He is a big personality, to say the least. And, you know, in this environment, he's one of those that if he caught fire, it wouldn't shock me. And if he ended up only getting 2% come primary day, it wouldn't shock me. Katie Porter had that well-publicized meltdown when a journalist asked her a few simple questions where she couldn't handle basic questions. And then, of course, the floodgates opened, ex-Porter staffers just, you know, unloaded story after story about what a terrible boss the former congresswoman is. I do think, you know, that probably has ended her ability to become one of the top two. And remember, this California governor's race is a top two situation. So everybody runs in the same ballot. There's really only two prominent Republicans that are getting some attention. You have this Riverside County Sheriff, Chad Bianco, very, very hardcore, sort of more of a MAGA guy. And then you have Steve Hilton, who's the British transplant, has a British accent and everything, but he's a U.S. citizen. He's been running. He was a Fox commentator. He was a former advisor to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister of the UK. I hadn't really taken his candidacy that seriously, not because he's not a serious guy. I think he is, but because I just don't think, and I still am skeptical that a former British citizen is going to be met with open arms by a Republican electorate or any electorate to become governor of, I mean, yes, they embraced Arnold Schwarzenegger, but Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, in some ways was as American as they come. And it wasn't a recent thing that he became an American to then jump in and run for governor on that front. So, but what I've noticed is the Democratic field is so weak that both Republican candidates with a huge undecided number have actually been the ones hovering closer to the top. You've seen different orders. Bianco will be one. Some of them, Hilton is one. Katie Porter with her name ID is two. And then everybody else is sort of below that. So the assumption is some more people are getting in. I don't consider Steyer to be a big name. He's big money, but I don't know if he's a big name on that front. And I don't, like I said, I have some questions about whether he's just too dour to catch fire. We shall see. By the way, Tom Steyer, I'd look forward to having you on the podcast. Steve Hilton, I know we've talked about having you on the podcast. I'm hoping to have you on soon as well. Then the other, though, shoe that I think the assumption is, you know, in whispers in California circles, is that people are just waiting for Rick Caruso, who lost the LA mayor's race 4 years ago to Karen Bass, that, you know, is he going to run for mayor, for mayor and challenge Karen Bass again, or is he going to run for governor? And it really depends on who you talk to out there. I've talked to people who are sure, of course he's running for governor. Why would he want to run for mayor? It's a ceremonial job. You don't have as much power. It's perceived power. And about the only draw of being mayor of LA over the next 4 years is being mayor of LA during the 2028 Olympics. So there's some people who swear, no, he's not going to run for mayor. He's going to run for governor. He's definitely going to run for governor. I think the field's open for him if he does run for governor, because you have sort of this race to the left right now that is with Katie Porter, Tom Steyer. There's nobody. I mean, Klubeck will tell you he's trying to hug the center lane. He calls himself a Bill Clinton, Harry Reid Democrat, which is his code for saying, hey, I'm a more pro-business centrist Democrat. But it's clear Caruso is going to, and that lane could be wide open if all of the other Democrats are going to play to a more liberal crowd. And I think some of this we're not sure. You have Antonio Villaraigosa, who's running again. He was kind of the only, seemed like the only candidate that had a shot at making Gavin Newsom's life miserable when he ran for governor in 2018. I actually moderated a debate that featured both Villaraigosa and Gavin Newsom on there, and they were the only two sparring partners, if you will. But that was a race that never felt in doubt. It was all about whether, well, would Newsom sort of, wear out his welcome, providing an opening or not, and Newsom didn't, and he ended up running away. Swalwell could be interesting. I don't want to write him off. He could end up raising a lot of money, but sitting members of Congress have struggled in the past in governor's races in California. It's just tough because it's tough to have much name ID. In some ways, Katie Porter is benefiting from the fact that she ran for the Senate and did run statewide. She obviously didn't make the runoff against Adam Schiff, but she certainly got a little bit of that. But I still look at this and I keep thinking there's got to be some bigger candidates that are going to jump in this race. Some, maybe some interesting outsiders that might jump in. It has been what I would say is a shockingly sleepy race that perhaps gets more interesting if Rick Caruso ends up jumping in, and then suddenly that might elevate things. But I'll tell you now, I do think the Republicans both of them have gotten enough traction where the top two is going to be a D and an R. I don't think you're going to have two Ds make it in the top two anymore. And I think there was a thought that that's where we were headed. I think there's definitely going to be a D versus R situation here because of the smaller number of Republicans and the increasingly large field of Democrats. I mean, if you're going to have Swalwell in this race, Tom Steyer in this race, Katie Porter in this race, Villaraigosa, Becerra, Klubeck is a self-funder, you see where we're going here. That's up to 7 Democrats splitting that vote. If you assume there's 30 to 40% of the electorate is going to show up for the Republicans, you see how very quickly that you almost guarantee that one of the two slots is going to go to the Republicans. But just in general, it's been fascinating to me how we haven't seen more star power try to come into this race. Anyway, something that I suspect we'll start to see some movement over the next few weeks, and maybe in and around the holidays, you'll start to see some announcements.